about to mess up your comfort zone. At least I sure hope so. The comfort zone is the place we're extremely comfortable in, we're very familiar with, and everything's all copacetic. But is that really where you're supposed to be? I don't think so. And I'm about to go back into Genesis and kind of create some guidelines for us to consider about where we're really supposed to be in life. Now, I want to say I'm not preaching at you because this is my own study for myself and I'm sharing it with you. So I'm, first of all, understanding this for me and including you in this journey that I'm going on. So Trudy Behrman here. I am the host of Profitable Social Influence TV, PSI TV, and I'm also the CEO of that organization. So we're in Genesis chapter 2, and I want to look at the place, the parameter, the purpose, the provision, the person, the partner, and the prophet. So what do I mean by all of that? So let's go to Genesis 2. Genesis, I had it on my phone, but it's Genesis 2. All right. Genesis 2. And I'm going to pick it up in verse 8. Genesis 2, verse 8. So we're looking at the place, the parameter, the person, the purpose, the provision, the partner, and the prophet. Okay. Genesis 2, verse 8. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put a man whom he had formed. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted, and it became into 4 heads. The name of the first is Pison, that is which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good, and there is bdellium and onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon, the same it is that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that is which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates. And the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And the Lord commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in that day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone, and I will make him an help meet for him. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought unto them Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called them, every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave name to the cattle and to the fowl of the air and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found any helpmeet for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. They were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. Okay, so now that I've read the text from which this is coming from, I want to start with the place. The place in question is the garden. Now, what is special about this garden is that there was somewhere outside of the garden. And we know this because when Adam and Eve sinned, God put them out of the garden. So God created a world that was beyond just the garden. So the place that God intended for man, the place that God wanted to have this communion, because he walked with them in the cool of the day, as it says later on, God created this garden and put them in it. So the place is a garden, and a garden is a protected, dressed, beautiful place. And many of us have gardens, and gardens take work, because if you just go along, you might see wildflowers growing on the side of a road. But if you see a garden takes work, and a garden has a gardener. So the place in particular is the garden. All right. So this place is important because later on, like I said, this is part 1 in a series. And when we talk about the place, ultimately, I'm going to talk about the kingdom, where we have a kingdom. God has put us in dominion over an area. So place is going to come up again when I talk about that. So this is part 1 in a series. So remember now, in this particular story, the place is the garden. But the garden had parameters. So the Bible talks about the 4 rivers. What is this? There's an ad over my Bible thing and I can't get to it. Okay, so the garden had parameters. Okay, so it talked about these 4 rivers: the Euphrates, the Gihon, the Pison, the Gihon, the Pison, the Gihon, the Hiddekel, and the Euphrates. Now, so this garden had parameters. These 4 rivers, and plus the garden had a gate, because they were put out of the garden and there was a gate. So the garden is the place, and the garden had parameters. This is important because remember, I'm going to talk about this kingdom that is ours later on. So we need to remember this. The garden is a place, and the garden had parameters or boundaries. Okay. Then within this area, we see that God had created man. Now, Adam is not just his name. Adam actually means mankind. So when God created Adam, when it talks about, I think in Genesis 1, that was like the summary. And so that's not saying God created the man Adam, whose name was Adam. Adam stands for mankind. Later on, we get more detail. And in this section of Genesis 2, we see that Eve is taken from Adam's rib, but Adam represents mankind, not just the man Adam, whose name is Adam. Okay, so here it is. Adam has a partner, but not only did God give him Eve as his human partner in life, Adam was God's partner in this whole creation story. Where am I coming from with that? So it says, Adam gave names to all the cattle and the fowl of the air and to every beast of the field. And then God also named Eve. So God created this garden and all this creation, but he allowed Adam to name the creation, to give it the names that we call them today. Because even though I will use my Bible and I'll go look up the Hebrew or the Greek, these words, Adam was the one who came up with the names. I promise you, I'm using my tablet and I have it front facing, and I'm not sure where I should be looking to look at you. So forgive me. I'm not really sure where I should be looking. So I'm just looking. Forgive me if it feels like I'm not looking directly at you. So Adam partnered with God in this whole creation process in giving the animals and the fowl and the trees and everything their names. He also gave Eve her name. So God gave Adam a partnership in his woman Eve, but Adam also partnered with God. This is important because later on, when I get into the rest of the series, we have a role too in terms of this partnering, not only with each other, but with God. Okay, and then the next thing is provision. So out of this story, it says, and the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. God had provided for Adam. There is provision in this garden. And I promise you, even now, God makes provision for us. You know, I'm from the island of Jamaica, and there are some people who would be considered very, very poor, living in abject poverty. But the average Jamaican in the countryside, not the city of Kingston, a lot of people in Jamaica have backyard gardens, and some people live on straight up farms. Most of the people who are supposedly poor will have chickens, they'll have a little backyard garden. There's a lot of fruit that they can freely eat from. And I would even say sometimes they even eat better than the average American because they're eating more whole, natural, straight from the ground food. So there is natural provision. In fact, when I was growing up, we had this huge mango tree in our yard, and the branches of the mango tree hung over into the street side, and it would always get a congregation of people who would, whether they were passing by or they came by specifically, and they would grab mangoes that were available for them to just quickly grab and pick right off the tree. So there is provision. God has already put provision here on the earth for all of us to enjoy. And of course, some of us have chosen not to live in gardens anymore. And so we are dependent on supermarkets. But the average person, even if you're the poorest person, you can probably find spinach growing wild. You know, people can eat dandelions and things. There are natural provisions in the world that you can find. There's provision that God has made. Even when God told Noah to build an ark, there was provision that the trees were there for him to go and get to build the ark. So God has already put provision. This is very important because, again, we're going to be addressing this series later on, and provision and the provision from God, the natural resources that we all depend on every day. Even for them to build a Tesla car, for example, they're looking for lithium. That is a natural resource they're digging out of the earth. Nobody's creating lithium, okay? So provision is very important. So we have looked at the partner. God had, Adam as mankind was in a place, the garden. The garden had parameters between the gates and the rivers had parameters. It had he had partnership with God and partnership with Eve in this whole thing called life, and in this thing about living through his purpose, because he gave the animals and the trees and everything their name, and then the person of Adam himself. So Adam was made in the image of God. And so when you look at who you are, especially if you are able to understand that we truly are God's creation, we're made in his image, and even Eve was taken from Adam. So, mankind has its identity, and that's a lot of times why we have to have this strong connection relationship to each other, because woman was taken from man, but man today is born from woman. There is that symbiotic relationship that we cannot ignore or deny. And it started with God, and God set it up that way. So we have that partnership. We have the personhood of the fact that we are made in the image of God, and woman was taken from man. So we have a strong identity and connection to each other. So we have that. I'm not going to go too much into the identity, at least not yet, but just understand that the Bible tells us we were made in the image of God, and don't believe anything different, because my son just had a little baby, and that baby is a spitting image of my son. Especially, I had baby pictures of my son, and when I put the two together, it's undeniable. It's almost like the boy recreated himself. He's not the same person. His baby is not the same person, but there is a strong identity in his father that is unmistakable. And his sister, my older daughter, she looks a little like her dad, but she has his personality in a very, very strong way. So the identity that we are made in, the identity of Christ, there is a strong resemblance. to God in who we are. So don't forget that. Then the purpose. So it says here, and the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. Gardens have gardeners. God created the garden, but he put Adam to keep it and to dress it. And if a garden is not kept and dressed, it will go wild and feral, and it won't be quite the beautiful garden that it is anymore. So we have a purpose. God did not just put Adam there and say, just do whatever, be bored. He gave him a specific job. And I promise you, every single one of us have a specific job here on earth. The next thing is that not only did he have a purpose to tend the garden, but there was profit to come from that. The profit is that every tree, this is going into more into Genesis 3 now, every tree had its seed built into it, and the seed creates the fruit. So we're always going to manifest on the outside what God has put in us on the inside. My son, for example, plays a lot of musical instruments. I can't play a musical instrument, but music comes out of him because music is in him. God has planted the seed of music in this boy. And so out from his heart, out from who he is, out from the essence of who he is comes music. Now, my creativity comes out in other ways, but that you're going to find that the fruit that you bear on the outside is as a result of what is on the inside. An apple seed will always create an apple tree. It won't create a peach tree. So whatever is manifesting on the outside very often is a reflection of what's on the inside, although some of us may try to copycat. So we'll talk about that another day. But I just hope for you that you will see that God has given every single one of us. He created the person in Adam, Adam meaning mankind, that Adam, mankind was put in a place, the place being the garden, that the place had parameters in terms of the gate. Remember, God put him out of the garden, plus it had the 4 rivers, which we looked at, that came out of Genesis 2. So the garden had parameters. This is going to be important because when we talk about later on, we're going to look at our boundaries, our parameters, our provision. All these things are going to come up in the next video that I make. And also in the place, God put him with purpose. He was put there to dress the garden. He had a purpose and he had a partner. Not only did God give him Eve, but he partnered with God because God had him name all the animals. And then out of that also was provision. Every tree he could easily eat, and then profit. So when you have the garden, as any farmer will tell you, they plant the seeds for a harvest later on. And the Bible also tells us in Genesis 2 that in the garden was gold. It says in verse 12, and the gold of the land is very good. There was also bdellium and onyx stone. So God has put in place the resources for profit as well right there in the garden. So we have in Genesis 2, we're looking at person, place, parameter, provision, purpose, partner, and profit. Trudy Behrman here. Thank you so much for joining me live or later. And yes, this is part 1 in a series, and I will develop this over time. And this is a study I'm doing for myself because I am revisiting why God has me here and what is the whole purpose for me being here and what it is that I'm to accomplish. So as I study this for me, I'm sharing it with you. And thank you so much for joining me live or later. Trudy Behrman here. I'm super simple to find, and I do look forward to connecting with you.